Good evening. Welcome to Class 5 of the 10 Perfections course, generously brought to you by the Theosophical Society in America. I am Sensei Mui, your instructor. That is not a picture of me on the screen right now. That is a picture of a monk of another tradition, being very soulful and meditative. This is who I am. I'm Sensei Mui. And this is the 10 Perfections class number 5. Now, we talked about renunciation last week, so I had to tell this story. I ran out of time last Tuesday. Anyway, there's a saying in Asia that old monks never lie, and since I'm an old monk myself, you can trust me on that. Once upon a time, the story goes, that this monk was passing by a farmhouse on his way to a pilgrimage to another monastery. And he knocked on the door with his begging bowl in his hand, and he was going to ask for food. Now, traditionally, when the monk stands there, he doesn't say anything, he just presents his bowl. And the householder is supposed to give him food, usually leftovers from the day before. Well, this farmer was so excited to see the monk. He was a true believer in Buddhism, and he was just really beside himself, and he asked the old monk in, and he said, come on in, meet my wife, meet the dog. We don't have any children, I'm sorry, but you can eat with us. You don't have to go out into the woods and eat by yourself. And the monk said, oh, great, thank you very much. He was an old guy, very, very humble, had practiced well over the 40, 50 years. Anyway, so he comes in, the wife fixes him some food, and they get to talking, and the wife and the farmer and even the dog liked this monk very much. So they said, please don't leave just yet. Stay with us a few days. You're not really in a hurry to get to this other monastery, are you? Well, he said, well, no, I can stay for a few days. So he stayed for a few days. He gave them Dhamma teachings. They enjoyed it tremendously. And then it was time for the monk to go. And as he was leaving, the farmer was very sad. His wife was very sad. Even the dog was sad. You know, he's sitting there with his tail tucked between his legs, whimpering, so sad that the monk was leaving. So the monk said, in gratitude for taking such good care of me, I'll tell you a secret. And you know old monks never lie. So if you go out tomorrow morning with a bow and arrow, every farmer had one, point your arrow at the sun, just like you were going to shoot the arrow, and just let it go. And where it lands, you will find a treasure beyond belief. Well, the farmer thought that was pretty good. They bid fond farewell to the old monk. That's not the old monk on the picture, by the way. I should disclaim that. And he went on his way, and the farmer thought about it. He said, well, that's kind of weird that there'd be treasure around here, but old monks never lie, so I'll try it. So he and his wife and the dog went out the very next morning to their front porch. He took his bow and arrow, and he pointed the arrow at the sun, and he pulled back as hard as he could, and he let it fly. Well, it went a pretty nice distance. And so he, leaving his wife and the dog at home, ran off to find the arrow. Well, the arrow had landed in a flower garden, but he was so excited he didn't ask for permission to dig. He just started digging in there and looking for gold. And lo and behold, the owner of the garden showed up. A rich merchant. And being a rich merchant, he was not very tolerant of people coming in, digging up his flower bed. So he was very, very upset. And he said, listen, before I have you taken to court and put in jail, I want to know why you are digging up my flower bed. Well, the farmer told him the story. And he said, you know, it was told to me by an old monk. And the merchant said, well, old monks never lie. So it must be true. But I know what the problem is. See, you're a farmer. You're poor. You don't eat well. You have no strength. You're tired after a hard day's work. But me, I'm a rich merchant. I'm well-fed. I outweigh you by at least 100 pounds. Let me pull the bow in the morning, and when we find the treasure, we'll split it. Farmer said, well, okay, it's supposed to be a fabulous treasure. I guess I can do that. So the next morning, they were out there at the farmer's porch. The sun came up, just like it is wont to do every morning. The merchant took the bow and arrow, pointed the arrow at the sun, pulled back as far as he could. It was much further than what the farmer could do, and he let it fly. The arrow went much, much further than what the farmer could do. They even had trouble finding it, but they did. It fell into the yard of this nice house. But they were very excited. The merchant said, well, if anybody complains, I'll pay to pick it, have it cleaned up. But we'll split this gold and we'll both be fabulously wealthy. Unfortunately, it landed in the backyard of a general. Now, generals are not very nice guys back then. You had to be mean, you had to be tough, you had to be a born killer, assassin, martial artist in order to become a general. So he comes walking out and he says, before I have you beheaded, I'd like to know why you're digging up my yard. Well, they told him the story. And the general thinks about it for a second and says, you know what, I may not have you beheaded after all. Because old monks never lie. Your story sounds reasonable. I'll try it, but I know what your problem is. You're a fat merchant and you're a skinny farmer. In order to use a bow and arrow properly, you have to be trained in the martial arts, and I am an expert in the bowmanship. So I will shoot your arrow tomorrow morning, and we'll split the money 3 ways. Cool, everybody was happy. After all, they would all be fabulously wealthy. They really weren't losing anything. And at the time, they really didn't have the money yet, did they? So they went back to the farmer's house the very next morning. As the sun was coming up, the general took the bow and arrow and he pulled it back, and it kept going back, and it kept going back, and then he let it fly. It went out of sight. It took him 2 or 3 hours to find the arrow, and this time it landed in a flower garden. And they were so excited, they went in and they started digging. The rich merchant saying, I can pay for the damages. And the general said, no, I have soldiers that'll fix it for us for free. And he said, even better. And so they're digging away, and you know where this is going. Out comes the king. They were digging in his wife's flower bed. And anybody that has a wife knows you do not mess with their flower bed. So the king, saying, before I have you tortured, beheaded, I'd like to know why you're doing this in my flower garden. My wife's flower garden, come to think of it. Well, they tell him the story. The king says, everybody knows old monks never lie, so there must be some truth to it. But let me find out what the monk actually said. So he sent soldiers out to go and find the monk. They searched high and low. They knew what monastery he was going to. They just didn't know what route. So eventually, after a day or two, they did find the monk. They brought him back to the farmer's house. The king, the general, the merchant, the farmer, the farmer's wife, and the farmer's dog were all there. And the king asked him, he said, did you tell him the story? To go out, point an arrow at the sun, and shoot it at the sun, and where it landed, he would find treasure? And the monk said, no. I never told him to shoot the arrow. I told him to let it go. Oh. So they went out in the dawn. As the sun was coming up, the farmer stood there with his bow and arrow, not even pulling back on the string, and just let it go. Well, like anything you just let go, it fell straight down at his feet. They looked at the monk and he said, I'm an old monk and old monks never lie. So they dug and they dug and they dug, And finally they found treasure, enough for four or five kingdoms over. All of them became very, very wealthy. Moral of the story, if you let go, you'll find treasure right where you stand. And that's all about renunciation, letting go of holding on. I hope you enjoyed that story as much as I did telling it. Besides, it killed 10 minutes. Okay, today we are talking about Viriya and Kanti, and we'll probably also get the Satsha. Viriya, number 5 on the list of top 10, is energy, persistence, endurance, effort, exerting oneself in line with all that is good. And now that we got this show on the road, I might as well tell you that has to do with right effort, sama vayamo, which actually means appropriate energy. It's the 6th of the eight path factors in the Noble Eightfold Path, and belongs to the part of the Eightfold Path that has to do with concentration. How much mental effort am I going to put into something? Kanti has to do with patience, forbearance, also means endurance. So it has something in common with Viriya, energy, effort. It means that you stick with things even when they take a long, long time for them to show results. It means you stick with it even though it doesn't seem to be working out quite the way you think it should. You stick with it because eventually the causes which will create conditions conducive to whatever you're after will manifest. Patience. The path takes a long time. The definition of right effort, or appropriate energy, is that, the Buddha says, there is a case where a monk generates desire, endeavors, activates, persists, upholds and exerts his intent for the sake of non-arising of evil, unskillful qualities that have not yet arisen. It also means that he generates desire, endeavors, activates, persistence, upholds and exerts his intent for the sake of the abandonment of evil, unskilled qualities that have arisen. There's a lot of repetition in Buddhism. He generates desire, endeavors, activates, persistence, upholds and exerts his intent for the sake of the arising of skillful qualities that have not yet arisen. And he does exactly for the same thing, activates, persistence, upholds and exerts his intent for the maintenance, non-confusion, increase, plenitude, development, and culmination of skillful qualities that have arisen. This is called right effort, according to Samyutta Nikaya 45.8. That means, in a nutshell, plain, ordinary, everyday, modern, contemporary English, that which we speak today, as opposed to the King's English of Shakespeare's day. This means that he puts a lot of effort into not allowing unskillful acts that he has not yet developed into developing. It takes a lot of energy because you have to watch your mind all the time. Have I done this before? Do I recognize it? If I don't recognize it, do I really want it to arise? If it has arisen already, am I just repeating the same mistakes over and over and over again, pretending that it's okay? Is this a quality that is helpful and skillful, but I've never used it, never seen it, never developed it? And if I do have good habits, skillful habits, how can I cultivate them to make them more skillful, more beneficial, relieving myself of more hindrances on the way to enlightenment, happiness, peace, and freedom, and for the benefit of everybody in my family, my friends, my community, and everybody else for that matter. What qualities do I have to keep from arising? What qualities do I have to keep from re-arising? What qualities do I need to cultivate? That's basically what right effort is all about. That's what we put energy into. The question now is, who does what to whom? Do I put energy into stopping other people from bothering me? Is that something I do? Well, in the Dhammapada, verse 165, it says, evil is done by oneself. By oneself is one defiled. Evil is left undone by oneself. By oneself is one cleansed. Purity and impurity are one's own doing. No one purifies another. No other purifies one. In other words, don't go looking for a savior. There's not one around. The only person that can keep you from doing evil is you yourself. No one can force you to make a mistake. No one can force you to commit a crime. No one can force you to lie. No one can force you to feel bad about yourself. No one can force you to feel good about yourself. You do all that all by yourself. Happiness, sadness, suffering, joy. They're all choices we make. They're choices we make by the way we interpret the world around us, the very world we are creating. When we defile our minds and our hearts, we are also defiling the world which we are experiencing. Remember, all the Buddha is talking about is human experience. He's not talking about Newtonian physics here. Every cause that I cause within my head has a reaction that happens within my head. And having that reaction in my head means that I'm eventually going to take action on it. The more evil I get away with or unskillful acts, actually Buddha never used the word evil, he called it unwholesome or unskillful. The more unskillfulness I use in my life and get away with, the more that sets up a habit, almost an addiction to that. When I was a kid, I got away with temper tantrums and being deceitful. I told this story so often I don't remember if I told it here or not, but I'll tell it again anyway because it's worth the telling. Back in the 50s, M&Ms, milk chocolate, melts in your mouth, not in your hand, were brown and black, or either light brown or dark brown, and the light brown ones were the ones that the kids all wanted. Well, one time, I remember this happened in a place called French Village near Caseyville, Illinois. One day they came out in colors. There were reds and greens and yellows, as well as the browns, light and dark. They didn't have blue back then. I'm not even sure they had orange. But anyway, those were colors. And they put them in these glass jars in these 5 and dime shops. And it was amazing. I saw those and they were pretty and they looked delicious. I loved M&Ms, and these were colorful M&Ms, and I couldn't have those M&Ms because I didn't understand poverty. My parents were poor immigrants. They just didn't have the quarter it was going to cost to buy a big bag. Anyway, I laid down on the floor, and I kicked, and I screamed, and I whined, and I yelled, and tears were coming from my eyes, itty-bitty little tears out of my 4-year-old eyes. Finally, this other woman just wanted me to shut up, so she bought the M&Ms for me. I ate the M&Ms, got sick as I recall, from eating too many M&Ms too quickly, but I thought to myself, hey, this worked out pretty well. Next time I wanted something, all I had to do was throw a temper tantrum. Remember how embarrassed you were last time, Mom? And it always worked. When I was about 10 years old, I wanted an English racer. You know those skinny wheeled bicycles with the 3 speeds on them? I think now they got like 15 to 20 speeds or something. Anyway, in those days it was 3 speeds. Real slow, normal, and fast. And I wanted one. I threw a temper tantrum. They got me one for Christmas. Just because I threw the temper tantrum. They couldn't afford it. But my birthday is the day after Christmas. So on Christmas Day, I got the bicycle. But they gave me the wheels the next day. That was their way of getting back at me. Go figure. Well, that worked out pretty well. When I wanted a car, I had got my license at 15 years old, 9 months. I wanted a car. I threw a temper tantrum. It was still working. Not as well, but it was still working. And I got a car. My father's old car. He decided to buy a new one. Well, these temper tantrums worked very, very, very well until I got drafted. It took the whole United States Navy and Marine Corps combined to get me off the habit of throwing a temper tantrum. But still, 40-some years later, when I want something really, really badly, I can feel the temper tantrums start to rise. I usually don't act on it, but I can still feel it rising. I want to scream, I want to shout, I want to lay down on the floor and hold my breath till I turn blue and pass out. We have to watch out for our own welfare. Obviously, doing things like this are not skillful. So, we cannot sacrifice our own welfare for that of another, no matter how great that other one is. We have to realize our own true welfare and be intent on just only that. This doesn't mean go out and don't help people, don't sacrifice yourself for another. People do that all the time. What it means is don't sacrifice your integrity for the sake of another. It's not worth it. If your boss wants you to lie, if your spouse wants you to lie, if your dog wants you to lie, don't do it. It's not worth it. It's not worth craving to satisfy somebody else. You know what else falls in this area is envy and jealousy. Envy and jealousy, when we want something like somebody else has got, and we try to keep up with the Joneses. We want a car like theirs. We want a house like theirs. We want a sprinkler like theirs. We want Christmas ornaments like theirs. We're sacrificing our integrity for their sake. We're letting them run our lives because we are craving what they want. We are empowering somebody who probably doesn't even know they're doing it to put us back in prison. So we're doing time once again, imprisoned by our cravings. We have to remember our own welfare, and this takes energy. So who is the master here? Others or ourselves? Well, the Dhammapada continues saying, you are your own mainstay. Who else could be your mainstay? With you yourself well trained, you obtain the mainstay hard to find. You, the mind that you have at that moment is exactly what you need to take refuge in. Make that the stable part of your life. Stop waffling about what's right and what's wrong. Do what's right. Another great line from the Dhammapada, and this has been used in a number of Zen stories. One day a warlord was traveling through part of Japan, and a little old monk who happened to be the abbot of a monastery chased away all the monks, told them to go home because he thought this warlord would kill everybody in there. Anyway, he climbs a tree, and he's looking out over the tree, or from the tree down at the soldiers. Well, the general warlord comes by and he sees the guy up in the tree and he says, "Who are you?" And the monk tells his name and he says, "Oh yeah, I wanted to come look at you. You're supposed to be the wisest man in the area." "What is the teaching of the Buddha, old man?" he asks. Well, the old man quotes the Dhammapada. "Stop doing that which is wrong, do only that which is good, and purify your mind," the old man said. The general laughed at him, going, "Ha! Any child of 8 knows that." And the monk says, "Yeah, but very few people of 80 can do it." It takes a lot of effort to do only that which is good. Stop doing that which is bad now, and purify the mind of the hindrances that imprison us. Right effort is to abandon. What is unskillful, monks? It is possible to abandon what is unskillful. If it were not possible to abandon what is unskillful, I would not say to you, abandon what is unskillful. But because it is possible to abandon what is unskillful, I say to you, abandon what is unskillful. If this abandoning of what is unskillful were conducive to harm and pain, I would not say to you, abandon what is unskillful. But because this abandoning of what is unskillful is conducive to benefit and pleasure, I say to you, abandon what is unskillful. They're very wordy back then. It's because it is possible that we can do it. If it were not possible to abandon unskillful behavior, abandon cravings, abandon what is harmful to our own integrity and authenticity, well, then people wouldn't be teaching us to do it. But it is possible. It takes a tremendous amount of effort, a tremendous amount of energy, a tremendous amount of discipline. But once you have mastered it, you don't need that much effort anymore. The effort becomes minimal because now it's habit. The discipline becomes minimal because you're habituated to doing that which is good. Whoops, one too many. There are factors of the path that need to be abandoned. One abandons wrong view. Why? So they can have right view. This is right effort. One tries to abandon wrong resolve to enter into right resolve. This too is one's right effort. One tries to abandon wrong speech and to enter into right speech. This is one's right effort. One tries to abandon wrong action to enter into right action, and this too is right effort. One tries to abandon wrong livelihood and to enter into right livelihood, and that is one's right effort. We have problems in almost all of these areas. Maybe not so much maybe the wrong livelihood is still a problem for a lot of people. A lot of people are selling alcohol, tobacco, arms, drugs. I'm not talking about pharmacists here. Doing things, selling things which are designed to be harmful for others. This is wrong livelihood. Abandon that, get into right livelihood. Life becomes a lot simpler when we have the right view, when we have the right resolve, the right determination, when we speak correctly, gently, honestly, supportively, when we put our actions away from things that are harmful into things which are beneficial. These are right efforts. There were wrong efforts, and that's going back the other way. Not a good trip. Right effort is develop that which is skillful. Again, develop what is skillful because it's possible. If it were not possible, nobody would be telling anybody to develop skillfulness. It is an art and a craft. It's not science. And it's not science because what is skillful for us at any given moment may not be skillful in another moment. As conditions change, what is appropriate also changes. Appropriate speech, for example, is not appropriate uniformly all the time. There are no absolutes in Buddhism. Appropriate speech, the way I talk to my cat, is not the way I would talk to my boss. I would not treat a child as if he were a wise old man. I would not treat a child like he's my buddy, because that's not appropriate. Especially if I were the child's father. How can you be a father and a buddy at the same time? You're either the father who guides the child or the buddy that plays with the child. You can't occupy the same space at the same time. There are times, however, when it's appropriate to be the child's friend. But it's also appropriate to be the child's father. We have to determine the situation. Is it right? Is it wrong? Is it appropriate? Is it not appropriate? If I'm trying to get fired, then it is appropriate to talk to my boss as if he were a 5-year-old child. But if I'm trying to keep my job and maybe even get a promotion, that's not a good idea. It's a matter of fine-tuning. Sona is a character in at least one of the suttas. The very word sona, it comes in our language as sonic, and it meant sound or music. So music asked, of course this is a teaching story, it probably never happened, but Sona asked, what if I were to disavow the training, return to lower life, enjoy wealth, and make merit? In other words, he wants to be unmonked. He wants to give his robes back, return to the lower life, the life of the householder, enjoy money rather than disdain it, and just make merit. How would that work? Well, the Buddha answers, over-aroused persistence leads to restlessness. Overly slack persistence leads to laziness. Thus, you should determine the right pitch for your persistence. Attune the pitch of the faculties, and there pick up your theme. In other words, if you practice too hard, put too much thought, too much effort into it, you miss the point. You become restless. You become bored, in a sense. You're trying to find something new. You want to do new things, great things. You want to penetrate even further. But if you're not putting the right effort into it, you become slack. You become lazy. It's called torpor. It's one of the 5 hindrances. It's sort of like just pretending to go through the motions of practice. So you have to determine the right pitch, the right frequency, put the right amount of effort into whatever it is you're doing, because that effort changes in every circumstance and situation. To penetrate, ferret out what the 5 physical senses are doing. And if you know what the 5 physical senses are doing, how they're responding, what kind of karmas are arising because of them, what your attachments and aversions are, then you can develop a theme. You can work with them. Now, there are 4 qualities that are nurtured through right persistence or right effort. The first one, sada sampada, be a person of mature conviction. Conviction in the principle of cause and effect, conditionality, but also karma. Conviction that if we do good, we'll meet with good. The universe is an incredibly user-friendly place. You put good efforts into it with the right intentions, and good things come back to you. But the intention has to be there. You can't say with your mouth, universe is a user-friendly place, that I can get a better job, I can get more money, and I can do greater things at work, when the back of your mind is saying, oh no, you can't either because you're a failure. You can't send mixed messages out into the community, out into the universe, to your spouse, to anyone, without them catching you. Because if you say, oh universe, I need something right now, I gotta have it, and the back of your mind says, yeah, but I'm not going to get it, I don't believe in this. The universe says, okay, you don't believe, I don't give. The same way a friend would do it. We have to believe that the goodness we do is greater wealth than we will ever get throughout all time. That we are generous people that give of ourselves generously. And you will be amazed at how quickly things turn around. But you've got to have that conviction. That's not blind faith. Try it. Watch it. It works. Sila Sampada, number 2. Be a person of mature virtue, whose words and deeds are in proper order, whose behavior is in line with the principles of honesty leading to purity. These are truly human values that we should foster within ourselves. Be honest. Sila Sampada, the quality of discipline, of virtue. Virtue means strength. Working from a point of strength, where your words and actions match, that they don't contradict one another. When your behavior is in line with principles of honesty, transparency. You can't claim, like it would be like to say, I am a great Buddhist teacher, I really practice hard, and I show up drunk. That somehow, I don't think you would believe me that I knew what I was talking about if I did that. Somehow, if I said I were a person of great virtue with my mouth, and then go to a pickup bar 5 minutes later, it doesn't work. Those are contradictory messages. Just like why when the universe doesn't seem user-friendly, it's because we're sending contradictory messages, except now instead of doing it to the universe, we're doing it to each other. It can't work. It would be easy, a lot easier if it did, but it doesn't. Life might be a lot more fun too, who knows. Kaga Sampada, be magnanimous, be generous in donations and offerings to others, finding reward in the fruits of generosity. Feel good about helping other people. If you don't have money or old clothes or food for canned goods for a food drive, whatever the thing may be, you can be generous in many, many other ways. Support, comfort. When people insult you, let it flow off. After all, it's not about you. You just happen to be in the way of their words. A convenient target. When people insult us or say things carelessly or thoughtlessly or do things that take the last chocolate, out of a box without offering it to you, which would only be polite, but sometimes people don't do that. Sometimes people don't say thank you for a gift. We can forgive, which is abhayadana. Forgiveness, abhayadana. Abhaya means fearless. Dana means donation. It's a donation made out of fearlessness. When we forgive, it shows that we have no fear. We haven't lost anything. Certainly not our self-image and self-esteem. There's also the gift of justice. Dhamma dana. Dhamma dana meaning reality donation, literally. It means that we act fairly with each other. This is also magnanimity and generosity. Didn't know I could say that word, did you? Magnanimity. Panya sampada, a person of mature discernment, whose thinking is circumspect, who actually considers his actions before he does them, and whose sense of reason is in line with the truth. God, I've got so many examples of that. It's ridiculous. I once knew a person, a lady in her 60s, living in Chicago, that decided she couldn't be happy unless she was with a man who had blonde flowing hair, blue eyes, 6'2", and lived in Sweden. Her age, had money. Well, given that the whole entire population of Sweden is about that of the greater Chicago area, that really limited her choices. It's not a reasonable choice to stake your hopes of happiness on. It's not reasonable to believe in miracles unless you have a basis for that belief. Faith is a matter of having experienced like happenings before, it will probably happen again. We have to think about what we do, what we say, and we really ought to think about the things that we believe in. In 44 years, I have never known the Dhamma to be untruthful to me. It always works for me. Therefore, I have faith in it. It's always worked before, should always work again. My significant other is always been truthful and honest with me, except in one case. That's not bad in 11 years. Okay, so she fibbed once. The odds are pretty good. Then she's probably telling the truth next time she talks to me. The odds are in my favor. I have faith in her. There are 4 reasons to maintain this persistent effort. We've already gone through them. For the sake of not allowing unskillful actions that have not yet arisen to arise. For the sake of abandoning unskillful qualities that have already arisen. That means, like, in the moment, I'm thinking something terrible. Let me get rid of that real quick. For the sake of arising of skillful qualities which have not yet arisen, like wisdom and discernment. And for the maintenance of non-confusion, increase, plenitude, and development and culmination of skillful qualities that are in the works right now. This is simple mindfulness. Pay attention to what's going on and be able to predict what might happen based upon previous experience. It takes a lot of energy to maintain effort and patience. This poor dog watching the skunk eat his meal is certainly putting a lot of effort into just hanging out and being generous. Sometimes generosity hurts. Khanti, patience, tolerance, and acceptance. Part 2 of tonight's talk. Patience is the capacity to accept or tolerate delay, trouble, or suffering without getting angry or upset. Patience is the settled reality that we are not in control. We have never been in control of anything. except maybe our responses to what is going on. We are not in control of even simple things. Like I was thinking this morning while I was brushing my teeth, what did I bring to this brushing of the teeth business? Did I bring the toothbrush? No, somebody manufactured that. It was sitting on a shelf. Somebody else gave me the money so I could buy it. I probably drove it home. Somebody manufactured an automobile, made it possible to put gasoline into the automobile so I could drive it home, manufactured tires so I could roll along easily on the highway. I didn't even bring the will to brush my teeth with me. I learned from somebody else that it was a good idea to brush my teeth, so I didn't bring that. I didn't even bring my teeth with me. They came from growing up. That means I had a proper diet. Somebody had to produce the food. I drank the proper amount of liquids. Somebody had to supply those for me. I had parents that gave me birth and an upbringing who taught me how to brush my teeth and why it was a good idea. I had dentists that hammered it into me and scared the hell out of me every time I went to them. It also caused considerable amount of pain once in a while. I really didn't bring anything to brushing my teeth. I didn't bring the water. I didn't bring the sink. I didn't bring the apartment that I'm living in. I really didn't bring anything except my response to willingly brush my teeth. Our response makes us responsible. That's not the same as being blameworthy. Blame and responsible are two different things. Responsibility is the ability to respond. Reaction doesn't take a whole lot of thinking. We just react. Responsibility is the ability to actually think about what it is we're going to do, given the circumstances and stimuli. And that takes patience. We have to be patient with the circumstance. We have to be patient with ourselves while we muddle through the billions of bits of data we have stored in our memory. In the Vipassana Sutta, which actually means the focused mind, we're told to be calm in the face of anger. Now this is a discussion between two gods. They're having a war with the Titans, or demons, I guess, in our mythology in the West. And of course they win. Gods always win. It's a story that, well, it's also in the Nordic sagas, and you find the same story in the Greek mythology. And the head god, Sakya, says, "Let him think whatever he likes about his captive, the king of the demons. From fear of me, he does not forbear. Among ideals and highest goods, none is better than patience found. For surely he who being strong forbears the ones who are more weak, forever endure the weak, and that is called the highest patience." In other words, his opponent in this war is being patient with him. The opponent isn't being patient because he's afraid. It's because he's strong. He can afford to take his time. He has virtue. He knows the risks of impetuous actions. That's why patience is called this kind of patience, where the strong are patient with the weak, is called the highest of the patience is. For whom strength is the strength of fools, it is said of the strong, he's weak. For the strong guarding the Dhamma, contentiousness is never found. It is indeed a fault for one who returns anger for anger, not giving anger for anger. One wins a double victory. And again, in other words, there are people who act out of strength, but they're foolish when they act out of strength. It's the guy experiencing road rage because he's got a gun in his glove box. He thinks he runs the world. It's the guy because he's got a nice house on the North Shore of Chicago, thinks he's better than anybody else. This is the strength of fools. The strength of the strong is guarding reality. Reality means that we're all pretty much in the same boat. And it's not worth arguing over petty stuff. It's not worth arguing at all. Because when two people argue, guess what? They're both wrong. It is ridiculous to return anger for anger. Anger is always a waste of time. The Buddha says maybe 100 times, anger is a disease. It doesn't do you any good. It changes your physical appearance. There is a reason why they call it being mad. Anger is madness, and madness is insanity. We're not thinking with a straight head. We're not focused. We're not having the vipacchiti. We lose. Arguing is always a lose-lose situation. Even the winners feel badly. Some of the qualities of patience. Forbearance is the highest observance. Patience is the highest virtue, so the Buddhas say. Let a man remove his anger. Let him root out his pride. Let him overcome all fetters of passion. No sufferings overtake him who neither clings to mind and body nor claims anything of the world. Remember, last time we mentioned that when the Buddha used the term world, he was equating it with dukkha, the suffering. We create the world we're experiencing. Not the material things in it, but the way we respond and react to it. That's our creation. A person who gets angry because they fear loss. Here there's a good indication, and it's probably true, that very, very often it is a loss of pride. I am angry because I feel like you're taking my self-esteem. I feel angry because you don't agree with me. And if you don't agree with me, I have a perfect right to be angry because you just don't see sense. Because I have to be right. If you're right, then that means I'm wrong, and I can't live with that. There goes my pride again. Patience is the highest kind of strength. Because with patience, you're not responding in kind. And that, by definition, is forgiveness. Very, very cool way to go through the day. Now, how we develop patience is by abandoning things, letting go, renunciation again, nekema. Turning away from that which is harmful, turning toward that which is good. And we can abandon certain things by tolerating them. For instance, I love these lists. We're very, very good on lists in Buddhism. We have at least 11 lists of just important stuff, and then maybe 1,000 lists of stuff that's not so important. One has to reflect appropriately, then one can tolerate things like cold, heat, hunger and thirst, flies, mosquitoes, wind-sunned reptiles, ill-spoken and unwelcome words, and bodily feelings that when they arise are painful, racking, sharp, piercing, disagreeable, displeasing, and menacing to life. Why can we tolerate these things? No one knows? Okay, I'll tell you. We tolerate them because there's not a hell of a lot we can do about it. It's going to be cold. Look at today, middle of August, high today was what, 68? It's supposed to be 95. We can tolerate heat. When it's 95, we complain it's not 65. We can tolerate hunger and thirst. Some people don't do that very well, but they can tolerate it. You can wait until dinner time. We're all affluent enough to have food in our refrigerator, I hope. We can tolerate flies. They're a fact of life. We can tolerate mosquitoes. We live in a swamp area. Of course we're going to have mosquitoes. We can tolerate wind. They call it the Windy City. We can tolerate the sun the few times it comes out. Reptiles, you don't see too many of those anymore. But in the ancient times, reptiles in an area like this, they would have been very, very common. And they're kind of icky looking, so people really didn't like them. Ill-spoken and unwelcome words, of course we can tolerate them because they're not about us. They don't mean anything. There's a saying in Buddhism, if somebody calls you a dog, turn around and look, see if you've got a tail. If you don't have a tail, then there's no harm done. But if you do have a tail, maybe you better take care of it. So words ill-spoken and unwelcome can hurt our feelings, but that's our choice to have our feelings hurt. Bodily feelings that when they arise are painful, racking, sharp, piercing, disagreeable, displeasing, and menacing to life, that is life. Of course we can tolerate it. We can tolerate being alive, can't we? This is called aging. This is called illness. Sometimes it's called death and dying. It's stuff that is normal to life. Everything on this list are things which are absolutely normal that we have to coexist with. Why? Because the fermentation, the intoxicants that rise to mind when we don't tolerate them, causes a great deal of harm. It causes us to have more cravings. It causes us to be unreasonable. So the temperature's 80 instead of 70. In the wintertime, we complain that it's not summer. In the summertime, we complain that it's winter. Or not winter. We complain about ridiculous things. Not many people complain about springtime, unless it rains, then we complain about the rain. We complain about things that are absolutely normal. And that causes us to become intoxicated. That's why the word fermentation is used. Things to be abandoned by avoidance, things we should avoid. This is a good list too. A wild elephant. Probably a good idea to avoid a wild elephant. Probably a good idea to avoid a wild horse, a wild bull, a wild dog, and a poisonous snake. It's probably a good idea to not walk into a stump, a bramble bush because they're all thorny and they hurt, a deep hole, or walk off the side of a cliff. Those are things we can avoid. A cesspool or an open sewer, we can avoid those too. Sitting in unsuitable seats. First time I read that, I thought he was talking about the electric chair. Wandering to the sorts of unsuitable habitats, going places we shouldn't go. We can avoid that. Associating with bad friends that could ruin our reputation. We can avoid that as well. Why should we avoid those? Because they create these fermentations again. These weird little thingies here that cause us to run off with an intoxication of the mind. And they can be abandoned simply by avoiding them. And this takes effort and patience because we have to work at it and we have to think about it. Responding instead of reacting. There are things that we can abandon by destroying them. The obsession over sensuous things, whether it's eye candy, ear candy, candy we can touch, smell, taste, or think about. Ill will, we can destroy ill will within us. We don't have to wish other people ill. We don't have to wish them harm. We don't have to be cruel to others. We can use kind speech, and we can destroy the habit of speaking abruptly. We don't have to do evil, unskillful things that harm another. We can destroy that proclivity. And we can also destroy unskillful mental qualities. We can actually wipe these things out of existence through the mind training offered in the Dhamma. That's through mindfulness training, meditation, patience, effort, right view, right action, habituating ourselves to a lifestyle that doesn't promote these features in our lives. Why should they be destroyed? The same reason. It creates these fermentations, and this takes a lot of energy. Why is patience so necessary? I love these New Age posters. Everything you need will come to you at the perfect time. We just have to wait for the perfect time. Well, I don't know about perfection, but I do know the things we need come when conditions support their coming. Conditions support my being here, sitting here in front of the camera, speaking right now. If the conditions didn't support that, if one part of those conditions weren't working toward the support of me sitting here talking to you, I wouldn't be sitting here talking with you. If the causes that brought me here, one thing were missing, I wouldn't be sitting here speaking with you. And the causes that make this moment arise is everything that has ever happened from the previous moment on back into infinity. Everything that has ever happened anywhere is manifesting as this moment passes, as a cause of this moment. And it's the same with the conditions. The conditions which support this moment have to be in perfect place, or else this moment does not occur as we experience it. It changes. If the microphone were a little higher or a little lower, maybe you couldn't hear me as well. If there were a finger smudge on the camera lens, maybe you couldn't see as well. If the slideshow hadn't been put together on time, you wouldn't be seeing a slideshow. Conditions have to be there. Patience allows us to realize that conditions and causes have to be there. We don't get what we want when we want it simply because the conditions aren't right. Maybe that's what they mean by perfection. The conditions are right. We have to wait for the conditions to manifest. And if they don't manifest, maybe we can put some effort and action into it, which will cause them to manifest. This is cool. This is a fake Buddha saying. It says fake right on it. The Buddha never did say the greatest prayer is patience. What he did say is the greatest virtue is patience. A lot of these fake Buddha things online. Thought I'd pull that one up. Satya, transparency, truth, or reality. Okay, we begin in Buddhism with the four truths, which are noble. And it's called the Arya Satya, the Noble Truths. It's not so much that the truths themselves are noble, it's that they create a noble person when that person follows the Four Noble Truths. Truth in Buddhism is almost always expressed by the term Satcha, S-A-C-C-A, in our spelling. And what that word applies to is Dhamma, reality. We cannot be real if we're not being transparent. We're not real if we're lying and being deceitful, shady, and underhanded. We are not real if we're lying to each other or trying to hide the truth from each other, any more than we can be real if we're hiding the truth and lying to ourselves. Reality and honesty in the Buddhist world are the same cloth. You can't have one without the other. And the Four Noble Truths begin with those four sayings. There is dukkha. There is the origin of dukkha. There is the cessation of dukkha. And there is the way to cause dukkha to cease. The third truth we call the cessation of dukkha. That's not really what it means. That wasn't the term that was used. It was something like nirodha dukkha. Nirodha means to be unimprisoned. It's a get out of jail free card, basically. And that refers to the idea that we're creating our own problems. We're creating them in our mind because we're giving into our hindrances, our laziness, our restlessness, our aversions, our attachments, and our ignorance. And as we give into those, we become further entangled in them. One of the gods once came to the Buddha. This is a story told in the Visuddhimagga, a commentary written, I think, about the 3rd century CE. And the god says, Yo, Buddha, this generation is a tangle of tangles. Who's going to untangle it? And the Buddha points to his monks. The generation that the god was talking about was not the generation of people his age. He was talking about the mental proliferation of stuff going on in the head. Lies and stories we tell ourselves when we're being dishonest with ourselves. It's like a guy going to a bar hoping to meet a girl there, and the girl's with somebody else. And before he can say anything or do anything or even walk up to her and say good evening, he's already telling himself stories. Well, she's cheating on me. She's with another guy. That guy's better looking than I am. He's probably got more money. Boy, that tramp is really a bad person. And storms out of the place angry with her, calls her up the next day and just chews her out. And all the time not realizing she was talking to her brother. That just recently happened, come to think of it. But we see things, or we hear things. Maybe we don't catch it all. We just automatically translate it into something we can understand, and based upon our karma, our past experiences that we cannot unexperience, unfortunately, we develop a whole new theme. Oh, they said this about me. They meant that about me. That's what they must think of me. And maybe we just didn't hear it right. We didn't see it right. We certainly didn't think about it correctly. We reacted rather than acted responsibly. We jumped to conclusions, and thereby jumping off a cliff that we could have avoided. The problem with dishonesty, whether it's to ourselves, especially to ourselves, or others, this was said by the Blessed One, said by the Arahant. So I have heard. For the person who transgresses in one thing, I tell you, there is no evil deed that is not to be done. Which one thing? This, telling a deliberate lie. Elsewhere he says, for a liar who has violated the one law of truthfulness, who holds in scorn the hereafter, there is no evil that he cannot do. If a person is willing to deceive himself or others, no, there's nothing he won't do, because he can always lie his way out of it. He can always justify it. He doesn't have to worry about the consequences, because he has nothing but scorn, no belief in, no worries about what happens hereafter. This doesn't mean the afterlife. This means hereafter it is done. A person who doesn't fear the consequences of his actions has no reason to get worried. They have no reason not to do anything they want. Being dishonest. How many times can you tell a lie before you start believing it yourself? 5 times, 10 times, 100 times? How many times do we knowingly hear a lie, and yet after a while we start believing it? Politics is filled with this sort of rhetoric. You hear it if you go to a courtroom. You hear it in a business meeting. You hear it on television. People die because they hear it. They hear all these wonderful lies about pharmaceuticals, metal hip implants. I remember as a kid, we thought asbestos was the greatest thing in the world. They already knew what was going to happen to people that worked with it. But there were no consequences back then. Today there are consequences. Cigarette commercials, back when I was a kid. 9 out of 10 doctors smoke and recommend Pall Mall to their patients. Don't hear much of that anymore, do you? Or John Wayne smoking his Camels that were prescribed to him by his doctor. Now we should have known that was all a lie, but we accepted it anyway. After all, it was the Duke. Come on. Duke wouldn't lie to us, would he? But we hear lies all the time, and if we thought about them, just for a moment, we would know we're being conned. But we don't. Why? Because we're conning ourselves at the same time. Telling ourselves about a fantasy that we're living or experiencing. Something that just does not exist in fact. What is the mark of an honest person, I wondered. So I said, Buddha, what is it? He said, let an observant person come. Okay, an honest person is one who is, catch these words, observant. One who is not fraudulent, not deceitful. One of a straightforward nature, and sometimes that can mean brutal honesty. I instruct him. I teach him the Dhamma. Practicing as instructed, he in no long time knows for himself, sees for himself. So this is how there is right liberation from bondage, that is, bondage of ignorance. Wow. Only an honest person can catch the Dhamma, the truth, the reality. Why? Because they're observant. They're paying attention. They themselves are not fraudulent, so they can see through other frauds. Since they themselves are not deceitful, they can see through the deceit of others. They are not deceiving themselves. They're not believing in the fairy tales of others. Characteristics of a thoroughbred. Now, I thought that was a kind of an interesting way to describe a well-practicing person. A thoroughbred of a monk. I have to make a quick disclaimer about that word monk. It does not always refer to a person in robes. The Buddha had a habit of calling all of his followers monks at one time or another, even if they were lay people married at home with kids. So that doesn't always mean a guy in a monastery. Whatever tricks or deceits or wiles or subterfuges he has, he knows them as they actually are, shows them to the teacher or to his knowledgeable companions in the holy life, so that the teacher or his knowledgeable companions in the holy life can try to straighten them out. In other words, a thoroughbred may be deceitful. He might be lying to himself. He could be a thief. He could be justifying that all the time. Might even be a murderer in the case of Angela Mala, who was a mass murderer or serial killer. I'm not sure what. I think serial killer. But they were honest about it. They knew they had these qualities and proclivities. They confessed them and said, "Can you help me out of this?" This is a thoroughbred. This is a purebred, top-of-the-line disciple. Because they have paid attention. They paid attention to themselves. They paid attention to the stories they tell themselves. They paid attention to the intoxicants that they themselves have fermented, drank from, and foisted on others. It's amazing that a person that would seem to have no significant social value except to cause harm is called a thoroughbred, because they understand that this is what's wrong and they need that help. It's like going to AA. Admit you have the problem and then announce it to the world that you need help from it. Are we honest with ourselves? Well, suppose you have a feeling of a deep spiritual contentment, of oneness and interconnectedness with the universe. Well, let's ask ourselves, to what extent is that feeling meaningful? Is it a sign that we've attained a heightened spiritual state? Are we in touch with some transcendent reality? Or did we simply have a nice dinner and we feel rested and physically satisfied? Which is it? These are important questions for people that read deep meaning into their feelings. People see it all the time. I ask psychologists when I'm teaching at different psychology events. Every once in a while I do teach psychologists. And I always ask the questions, are feelings, emotions significant? And they go, oh yeah, they're real. I go by them all the time. Well, sometimes they're not real. Sometimes we add the meaningfulness to them. We really have to be honest with ourselves on what's going on. I once gave a talk at a Zen center. There were a bunch of monks and nuns there, all Zen. It's when I first came to Chicago. I had just been recently ordained myself, but I have a background in Theravada, old school Buddhism. And the question came up about celibacy. And I said, oh yeah, in the monastery, I highly recommend celibacy, so you can keep your mind on the practice. Now, what you do outside of the monastery is your business. But in the monastery, celibacy and sobriety should be the rule. I got so many arguments and hate emails about that. They just could not believe that celibacy would ever be recommended, especially not by a man. The reason being is because when they had the sexual experience, they and their partner became as one being. Come on. That's your emotion running away with you. You got satisfied. You were feeling content, probably lit a cigarette afterwards, and went, oh, I'm blissful. Well, this is the whole trip behind some forms of tantric yoga. The bliss comes after the rush of joy. And that is sometimes mistaken for a spiritual experience, transcendent reality. Why do people believe their feelings? Why do they think they're real? They want to believe that their feelings constitute their true identity and that their feelings tell the truth. That way, they don't have to tell the truth to themselves. Their inner self has already told them the truth. My inner self is a scared child living in a closet. I certainly don't want to listen to his advice. Feelings can lie. A warm sense of interconnectedness with the universe or with another human being might just mean that you've got great digestion and that you're living comfortably. It might mean you had a great meditation period. It might mean you just had a really emotionally sensitive experience. We have to be careful when we start attributing reality to these things. The Buddha's approach to feeling, these emotional states, our feelings are fabricated. All forms of happiness is a feeling, and every feeling we have is fabricated. This means all the feelings that we have are motivated. There's an intention behind them. There's a specific drive toward that feeling. We have ulterior motives when we feel these emotions. Now remember, you only have three feelings: pleasant, unpleasant, neither pleasant nor pleasant. Those feelings, when one arises, so comes with it all these other thoughts and cognitive processes, and we call those emotions. They're just complex thought forms. This means that all feelings, those thought forms, have motivation. They're intentional. We put them together for a certain purpose. We want a particular feeling, if nothing else, than to establish a sense of identity of who we are and what we want. I'm the sensitive guy at the back of the room that cries during chick films. That's a sense of identity. I'm the guy that gets angry at injustice. The injustice has nothing to do with anything. We're trying to identify ourselves. If we were truly concerned about the injustice, wouldn't we be doing something about it rather than getting irate? There is a purpose to our feelings, and very often it's blind and it's unknown, but it shapes what we feel and who we believe we are. Getting close to the end here. Thank God I'm running out of slides. There was a facial emotion study done a few years back which proved to neuropsychologists without a doubt, emotion is pretty much a habit. Every common emotion that any human being on the face of the earth can express with a particular set of facial expressions is universal, regardless of culture. Grief, contentment, happiness, ridicule, each have facial muscle patterns and these are found in all societies to be the same. Researchers attempted to master the different expressions, didn't watch chick flicks, didn't get outraged, didn't get candy bars, zuzus, and wham whams to make them happy. They just mimicked the facial expression, trying to get it down pat. If they worked on happiness one day, they would be happy at the end of the day. If they mimicked expressions of sadness, then eventually sadness would set in. The emotion doesn't necessarily have to be real just because it's strong or persuasive. It may just simply be a habit that we have formed, a result of the way we carry our body, the way we compose our face while we're listening or watching something. Now, sometimes there are stimuli which can cause emotions to spontaneously erupt, but more often than not, we respond in an emotional way because we have contorted our face or moved our body in a certain way, and their emotional response kicks right in. And that too is called karma. An experience from the past manifests in the present in an altered form. Here is an example. The older lady, come on, where are you? There you are. This person here is an actress mimicking the facial expression that is found here in a genuine child from the Christian Children's Fund, I think, before they were exposed. One of the pictures that was used in one of their advertisements. The eyebrows, very similar. The eyes, also similar with the triangle, the downturned lip. The eye peaked, and the lower eyebrow, or the underneath the eyebrow goes up, just like here and here. The top of the eyebrow goes up, noticeable on this side and this side. Notice the arch, very, very similar. Anyway, this actress mimicking this face, after 3 weeks, actually had to be put on medication because she felt clinically depressed just from doing the facial thing. Nothing weird had happened in her family. She had to admit that that there was no reason why she should be depressed. But in that study, I don't know exactly how many people they used, but they said 87% of the people. We don't need that one anymore. Time's up anyway. People that, 87% of the people that were in the test, the study, had exhibited the emotion that they were mimicking through their faces. Any questions? Any answers? Any comments? Anybody there? Okay, well, in that case, is there typing? No, chat, everyone. All right then, I will say good night.